Good morning, everyone. I'm Riya Pramanik, and we are learning about our course that is on conflict resolution and peace building. The course code is BPSC 146, and here we are learning about how to resolve a conflict and how to build peace. So, this is what we and in this block 3, we are particularly focusing today on Unit 8, that is meaning and significance of peace building, and Unit 9, that is about the approaches of peace building. So, in today's lecture, we are going to complete two units, that is Unit 8 and 9, which is talking about the meaning and significance and also the approaches of peace building. So, let's start. Let's introduce this peace building topic. Peace is considered essential for an individual's well-being. So why we are learning this course, why it is there in our syllabus? Because peace is something which is very essential for an individual's well-being. If there is no peace, no individual can live their life happily. They can't grow, they can't develop themselves. Peace is very essential to develop someone's abilities. However, when we talk about peace in international relations, our reference is not to only individuals' mental peace or morality or social behavior. So, we are learning this unit, we are knowing this chapter. Why? Because we are talking about peace in international relations and not only about the individual level. So, we are learning about international level, and in international level, peace is not only we are not referring peace in the sense of individuals mental peace or morality or social behavior, but we are concerning on the morals and behavior of nations, groups of international arena that often throw a challenge to peace. So here in this unit we are learning about all the nations, all the international groups, what is their behavior with each other and how they are throwing challenges towards peace. So this is what we are focusing here. In We are living in a nuclear age, and this problem has assumed critical dimensions. So why we are calling it a nuclear age? Because there are nuclear weapons that is there present in our contemporary times, and in that kind of situation there is a threat to peace. Because if there is some kind of outbreak of war, there is always a possibility that nuclear weapon will also be used. And in this kind of condition, there is always a sense of fear that is instilled within nations. So this put a risk of the very existence of human race. So as we all know that what was the impact of nuclear bomb drop in Japan during the Second World War, and we know that how nuclear is a threat to the existence of human race and also the civilization. And that is why this age is this problem is very critical. It is therefore important that we take establishment of enduring peace for the entire world seriously. So this is why peace should prevail and peace should be taken seriously. Now, moving forward, in this international system, every nation is guided by the pursuit of its own self interest. So, here in the international system, we can see that every nation is guided by the pursuit of own self interest. Everyone wants their self interest to be fulfilled. They struggle for power, they struggle for security, and this is why the peace is challenged. This is the reason. So, in the international system, every nation is guided by the pursuit of its own self interest. Everybody wants to compete with each other. Everybody wants to, they want to compete. They want to become the first. So, there is always a race that is going on because of power, because of security issues, and repressive and unjust human condition also creates a stumbling block in achieving peace. So not only this, self-interest, struggle for power is the reason which throws challenge to the peace, but also repressive and unjust human condition can, become a blockage or become a hurdle in achieving peace. So, peace is of critical value in nuclear age that threatens the existence of humanity and human civilization that we have already learned. And also, peace is critical for everyone's development, as we discussed in our previous slide, that how you can develop only in a peaceful condition. If there is constant conflict going on, you can't develop mentally, you can't develop, in your finances, you can't develop morally, because there is constant conflict that is going on, which challenges peace. So peace is also critical for everyone's development in a globalized, interconnected world. So now we are living in a globalization age, and here every country is connected to each other, and peace is important for all the countries. Where global challenges such as climate change, international terrorism, spread of infectious diseases, etc., require harmonious relations among countries. So, in this globalized world, all the countries are interconnected with each other, and the challenges that they are facing commonly, that is climate change, international terrorism, spread of infectious diseases, as we could see during COVID, and etc., require harmonious relation among countries. So these kinds of challenges, global challenges, cannot be handled single handedly. You require someone to take a collective decision, and to take that decision there is a requirement to maintain harmonious relation with other countries. Otherwise it will not be able to possible to take any kind of decision and make policies. Throughout the age, the idea of peace has been imbibed into various traditions, social systems, and religious scriptures. So this is not new to any civilization. Idea of peace was already in existence, and invariably all civilizations have developed only when the larger environment has been peaceful. So if we look at the history of the evolution of all ancient and modern civilization, it becomes clear that peace is the necessary precondition for progress. So every branch of discipline, be it art, music, sculpture, literature, etc., they try to flourish only the larger environment that has been peaceful. So peace is something which everyone look forward to. In countries where war, turmoil, and there are many, conflicts going on, progress of people and the nation are stagnated. So whenever there is a conflict going on in a particular nation, you can see that the people living in that country are very, very, frustrated, very, very, in a bad condition, bad situation, and their progress is not being properly happening. So cultures evolve only when a society is peaceful. When you can develop culturally, when you are living in a peaceful society. Thus, it can be said that peace is as old as human civilization itself. So, if we trace the origin of peace, or peace, want of peace, that is always there from the time when human civilization started growing, and it is something which everyone wants to. So, peace, the word peace is a recent origin. Though it was already there, there is already a condition, peaceful condition, which everyone wants, but the word peace is of recent origin. So, in a basic sense, peace means harmony, concord, or tranquility, but the concept of peace has multifarious dimensions and has a rich content in various religious and philosophical traditions. So, the word peace is of recent origin, and it generally means about the harmony, concord, or tranquility. But this peace has different, dimensions regarding the religious and philosophical traditions. So now let's talk about the meaning of peace. So peace has many dimensions and is applicable to different spheres of human and social existence. So as we already discussed that peace has different dimensions, and different human beings, apply peace differently. So if we ask a religious person, for example, to explain the meaning of peace, they are likely to see it from a spiritual angle. For the religious person, peace is finding God, or praying to the God brings peace to them, and depict political conflict as a symptom of deeper spiritual malaise. So for them, for the religious person, this political conflict is, a symptom of deeper spiritual malaise, of human beings not being at peace with themselves, with others, or with God. So, for the pacifist, peace means the moral organization of society on the principle of non-violence. So, to a Marxist, peace is nothing more than the false promises of capitalism in the deeper reality of international class struggle. So, if you talk about a Marxist, for them, peace is nothing more than a false promise of capitalism. It gives you promise that peace will prevail, but in reality, there is international class struggle which is going on. So, for observers of international affairs, the meaning of peace is primarily the absence of war and conflict. So, people who think and who is concerned about the international affairs that is there, the meaning of peace is different for them, and for them, peace is primarily the absence of war and conflict. Let's talk about the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So, Immanuel Kant provides a more positive and optimist view of peace. So, there is a difference between negative peace and positive peace. So, here we can say that Immanuel Kant provides a positive view of peace. So, he considers it in the genuine goal of politics because peace is something that is desired by all. So, according to Immanuel Kant, peace is something that is desired by all. So, for Kant, peace and democracy are closely linked. So, he states that peace is first and end of hostilities and indicates that the problem is largely one of good organization. So, according to Kant, he equates peace with a condition which is the final end of jurisprudence and concludes by designating it the highest political good. So, for Kant, it is the peace is the designation, and he is designating peace as the highest political good because, according to Kant, peace is something that is desired by all. So now let's gets forward and let's see what Johann Galtung is saying. So Johann Galtung is expanding the concept and introduce the notion of positive peace and negative peace. So negative peace, according to Galtung, is the absence of war, while positive peace is the absence of structural violence. Please note it down that according to Galtung, negative peace is absence of war, whereas positive peace is the absence of structural violence. So, by structural violence, Galtung implies the inegalitarian and discriminatory social structures. It also indirectly inflicts violence upon individuals or groups in a systematic and organized way because of the institutions and practices they condone. So, in the past, slavery was an example of structural violence. So, if slavery is not there, you can say that there is positive peace. But if there is a war going on and it gets stopped, it is a negative peace because, uh, in a long run, there war is stop of war is a temporary because the reason behind the war is not getting solved and it will or automatically give rise to another conflict or war in the upcoming times. Let's talk about the cultural traditions. So Takeshi Ishida, who was a Japanese political scientist, studied the different conceptions of peace in various cultural traditions. So according to Ishida, it is listed the following conceptions of peace as most prominent, identifying along with them the differing characteristic peace value that often influence the concept of peace in each of these cultures. So Ishida listed, the conceptions of peace, and what were those? First is shalom, that is in Judaic Christians, which paid greater emphasis on positive orientation toward justice. Next is Erini, that is Greek, and Pax, that is Roman, stressed on good orders. Shanti, Indian, and Ping Ho is Chinese, and Hiwa Japanese, that is tranquility of mind. So, declaring that these ways of conceptualizing peace with different peace values are likely to conflict with one another. So, Ishida suggests that it would be helpful if the scholars would compute the use of peace in a state speeches in order to clarify that structural concept currently in use in each nation. So, according to Ishida, justice should not be neglected in favor of harmony and good order. So, justice is the ultimate thing for Ishida, and according to Ishida, it is not to be neglected because this is not something which you can negotiate with harmony and or good order. So, Ishida's conceptualization of peace across culture is interesting. It, however, suffers from oversimplification. So it tends to subsume diverse moral goals and political objectives under the single umbrella of peace and goes on to ascribe some sort of automatic compatibility between them. So, moreover, each of Ishida's cultural formulations seems to represent a narrow conceptualization in which one value is stressed to the determinant of others. Now let's talk about negative and positive peace in detail. So there is need to distinguish between these two concepts because this is something which is very important. So first, negative peace defined as the absence of direct and organized violence that we have discussed. That absence of war is known as negative peace. For example, when there is a ceasefire between two warring countries or groups, negative peace ensues. So suppose there is a war going on and ceasefire happened and two countries who are involved in the war stopped. That is called negative peace because peace prevails because there is no war. It is negative because something that was undesirable like violence stopped happening. Why this is called negative? Because something which is undesirable, violence is undesirable, it got stopped. That is why it is negative. This does not mean that relationship between the warring parties has been restored. Do note it down that why it is called negative, because war stopped, but that doesn't mean that the hostilities, that the relationship between these two countries are restored. That enmity, that hostilities are still there. That is why this is called a negative peace. So peace prevails because the war is to happen now onwards, but the enmity is still there among the warring countries. The second concept is the positive peace. So, positive peace is said to prevail when there is restoration of cooperation and integration of human society. So, positive peace is said to prevail when there is restoration of cooperation and integration of human society. So, suppose the warring countries are now restoring their relationship, they are leaving their enmity behind. So, that is called positive peace. Positive peace serves the need of people at large. Not for the time being, negative peace is for the time being, but positive peace is about people at large. It has a longer, view that it thinks about the future. So it is important to understand here the absence of violence should not be confused with the absence of conflict. Do note it down because violence may occur without conflict and conflict may be solved by means of non-violent mechanism. So this is why there is a difference between violence and conflict. So both are different because violence may occur without conflict. Without any conflict, violence can occur, and also conflict can be solved by the means of non-violent mechanisms. So the distinction between these two types of peace gives rise to a fourfold classification of relations between two countries. So war, which is unorganized group violence; negative peace when there is no violence but other form of interaction or cooperation takes place, and where the best situation is of peaceful coexistence. Positive peace, where there is some cooperation interspread with occasional outbreaks of violence. Unqualified peace, where absence of violence is combined with full cooperation. National peace system first is based on distribution of power. So most peace thinking has centered on the problem of how power shall be distributed in a best manner among the nations of the world. So this distribution of power is something which is, one of the major concern for all the nations of the world. A major limitations of theories relating to this is their sole focus on only coercive power and neglect of other kinds of power. So powers can be hard power, soft power, but here these theories which talks about power, distribution of power, they are mainly talking about coercive powers and they neglect the other kinds of power that is different from hardcore, powers like soft power of a country where they can influence others with their culture, their traditions, their food. So these are the things which comes under soft power. For instance, influence is an important but often neglected aspect of power. So when you are influencing someone, it is your power that you can influence others. But this power of influence is neglected aspect of power. Nobody considered this influencing power as a power. They doesn't count that. However, if we simply focus on the tradition of studying the distribution of military power, there are four major models of power. The first model is that of minimum equality, which is based on the theory that the international system is best served by making power the monopoly of one nation or system, just as it is by some states around the world. So the first model is about the minimum equality. The second model focuses on maximum equality, or what is usually referred to as the balance of power. In this sense, that no nation or alliance is strong enough to defeat another nations or alliance. If somebody is more powerful than the other, there is a possibility of, war. There is possibility of overpowering the small country. But if you have balance of power, so both of them have, they will not have any kind of sense that they can defeat the other. So a modern variation of this is the balance of terror, wherein a nation may defeat other nations but only at the risk of being completely destroyed itself. So this is what balance of terror talks about. So the third model attempts to keep or stabilize military powers at a low level. All kinds of arms control efforts fall within this category. Finally, the fourth one, there is a model that seeks to do away with or stabilize military power to a zero level. So, this refers to the general and complete disarmament advocated by the pacifists. Now let's talk about international peace system, which is based on organization of conflicts. So the second general type of international peace plans focuses on the organization of the conflict. So this is basically a crisscross model, and it is based on idea that more the number of conflicts a system harbors, the more it is strengthened, not weakened, provided all these conflicts do not divide the units in the same way. For example, two nations may be allies in one conflict. For instance, some Western and Eastern countries were allies during the Cold War. However, they may simultaneously be foes in another conflict. For instance, when it came to be antagonism between the rich and poor nations. So this subject them to cross-cutting pressures. Such a situation can also create for withdrawal and neutrality or non-alignment. Suppose in Cold War, they are few nations are on one side. They are one party where they are allies during the Cold War. But on the other hand, they have their economic issues also, where one party is richer than the other. So there is also conflict going on between the rich and poor countries who are fighting the Cold War together. So this is what this, crisscross model talks about. So in other words, because multiple laws develop, it prevents complete identification and involvement in any one conflict. So there is also a greater tendency for groups that are not part of the cross pressures to serve as a channel of communication. Now let's talk about international peace system, which is based on individual loyalty conflicts. So according to this peace model, the potential for violence among nations is reduced when many loyalties are induced in individual citizens. So this can take two forms. First one is a peace plan which may seek to prevent conflicts by preventing conflictual polarization by inculcating multiple loyalties. This is done by institutionalizing, preferably across potential conflict borders, secondary and primary relations between individuals from different nations. So, in practice, the suggestions include people to people exchanges, children, youth, students, professionals, politicians, mixed marriages, increased knowledge, and empathy. So, a second plan seeks to build a cross cutting organizational loyalty. So, the division of the world into nations and territories provides roughly an exhaustive and mutually exclusive division of humankind. But there are also nearly 2,000 international organizations which provide many individuals with other possibilities of identification, although this division is far more exhaustive and not exclusive either. Now let's talk about the international peace system, which is based on degree of homology. So homology between nations, meaning the extent to which they are similar in social and political structure, is also considered an important factor in peace plans. So there are two models of peace based on this homology concept. So in the models of minimum homology, nations which are very different in their value system structures are unlikely to compete for the same scarce values. They can instead be interdependent and establish a symbiotic relationship based on complementarities. On the other hand, in the maximum homology model, nations are as similar as possible in social structure and value structure. This facilitates interaction and creates value consensus. So it is argued that greater the similarity between nations in terms of their culture, including language, the lower is the probability of misunderstanding. So if there is similarity, just understand this: if there is similarity between nations, there is less probability of misunderstanding. So the theoretical basis is the thesis of value homophily, that is, similarity tends to produce liking and interaction. Now, homology between nations, meaning that is about homophily. Okay. So now let's move forward and learn about international peace system, which is based on degree of interdependence. So there are some models of peace which are based on interdependence between nations. So interdependence or interaction, where some kind of positive value is exchanged between the interacting parties, can vary in frequency, volume, and scope. So trade between two nations is a very good example how all three, the frequency of trade, the value volume of trade, and the variety of items being traded, which vary independently. So there are two principal models based on this concept. The first is the model of minimum interdependence, and such model envisages a world where each nation is autonomous and self-sufficient, and no nation intervenes or interferes in the affairs of any other nation. This is a clear case of negative peace, where positive peace is exclusively ruled out, according to Burton. So the second model is that of maximum interdependence. So, interaction or interdependence among countries or certain specific kinds of exchange should not be confused with functional cooperation. So, functional cooperation implies that the parties involved work together to produce something they may then also share together. So, for example, one form of functional cooperation can be co-production, where several countries combine resources in order to produce something really big, such as supersonic commercial airplane or gigantic developmental project. So this is a good reason to believe that at all the level of individuals, functional cooperation on equal terms is one of the factors most efficient in producing integration. Now let's talk about world peace systems, and most peace thinking has evolved around the problem of how power can be best distributed among the countries. Okay, so the first model is that of minimum equality power. This is based on the theory that the international system works best when there is monopoly of power by one nation or system. So examples are Pax Romana, Pax Ecclesia, and Pax Britannica. So these are the instances of Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, and the Britain maintaining law and order over large areas in the globe. So the second model is based on maximum equality, or what is usually referred to as balance of power. So this model works on the principle that no nation or alliance is strong enough to defeat another nation or alliance. A modern version of this is the balance of terror, in which a nation may defeat other nation, but only at the risk of itself being completely destroyed. So this is what we have learned in this world peace system, where we can see that there is a modern version which talks about that if nation wanted to defeat one nation, but there is always a risk of itself being completely destroyed. So the third model is based on keeping military power at a low level. Example of this are all kinds of armed controls efforts, especially those that have taken place since the Hague Peace Conference that happened in 1899 to the present day. So finally, there is a model that seeks to stabilize military power to zero level. So the general and complete disarmament advocated by pacifists falls in this category. So, pacifism advocates that such a state of zero military power and complete disarmament can be done unilaterally. One side by setting an example, weapons become meaningless when they do not counter similar weapons, when soldiers and government refuse to use arms. So with this, we have ended with our unit A, that was about meaning and significance of peace building. Now we are moving towards peace building's approaches. So we are now going to learn about unit 9, that is about the approaches of peace building. So, peace building today is one of the well established subfields of international peace operations. So, this is something which is a very well established subfield of international peace operations. It has become especially interesting located as it is in the still uncharted terrain of post conflict activities. So, when peace building begins, it begins when guns have stopped firing and there is a tacit or explicit ceasefire agreement between parties to the conflict. So, traditionally, this is where conventional UN peacekeeping would normally come to an end, and the UN forces would depart, leaving the parties to conflict to resolve the dispute using the political processes. So, it is this process of strengthening peace at that watershed point when violence has ended and ceasefire agreement signed that peace building has emerged as a specialized field. So, this originally coined in 1975 by Johan Galtung. We have discussed about Johan Galtung in our previous unit about the negative and positive peace. So, the foundation of the contemporary concept of peace building were laid formally in 1992 in UN Secretary General Boutros Boutros Ghali's report, An Agenda for Peace. Do note it down. This is very, very important that when was the concept of peace building was formally evolved and established. So this term is coined by Johan Galtung, first point, in the year 1975. Please note it down. Then when it was laid down formally, it was in the UN Secretary General during the 1992 tenure Boutros Ghali's report that was famously known as An Agenda for Peace, where there is the discussion of peace building happened. So this is where the peace building were laid formally. The concept was laid formally in 1992. So this UN report by Boutros Ghali defined peace building as actions to identify and support structures which will tend to strengthen and solidify peace in order to avoid a relapse into conflict. So, even though the UN peacekeeping forces had been engaged with similar responsibilities since early 1960s, this new mandate had since made peace building both a specialized field. So, it is an integral part of international peace and conflict resolution thinking and practices around the world. Now let's talk about the conceptions of peace building. So, armed conflict trends and ideas about peace are interrelated. Thus, as the trends on armed conflict change over time, so does the peace response to it. So, it is interrelated. How and what are the patterns of armed conflicts decides how the peace is going to be established. So, it is in response. In response of armed conflict, peace is being used. So, this shift from short term peacekeeping to stay on long term peace building after the violent part of conflict has ended and ceasefire agreement is signed has largely been driven by the changing nature of conflict. So while the earlier conflicts were interstate, most post-Cold War conflicts of 1990s were intrastate conflicts. Such conflicts often arose from and often dissipated gradually into sporadic and low intensity violence that blurred the distinction between war and peace situation. Secondly, it also made equations between parties to conflict asymmetrical, which attracted larger involvement of civil society actors and external agencies like the UN, which ensured that the state was not allowed to, renege from its agreed commitments in their ceasefire agreement. Finally, Civil society actors, NGOs, and agencies who had been working in conflict areas became active players in academic discourses on peace building and its practice, and strongly favored a wider conception of peace building, much wider than what was initially adopted as an agenda for peace in the UN, which we have discussed. That agenda for peace was a report that was presented by Boutros Ghali, who was the UN Secretary General in the year 1992, and that is one of the major year where the concept of peace building was formally laid down. Don't forget that, it is very important. Let's talk about let's continue with knowing about conceptions of peace building. So in general, academics in the area of peace building articulated a wider definition. So they treat peace building as an umbrella concept that includes both traditional peacekeeping as well as an expanded peacekeeping responsibilities. So this implies long-term engagements of peace building operations. So several of them seek to include various tasks like setting up mechanisms for early warning, violence prevention, advocacy, intervention, humanitarian relief, ceasefire, and establishment of peace as part of peace building efforts. In the more expansive definitions, peace building is seen as aiming to create positive peace, which does not limit itself to simple absence of physical violence. So instead, it extends to attending to sources of invisible or structural violence. Even the narrower definition of peace building involves addressing the root causes of conflict, which make repatriation, rehabilitation, reintegration, reconciliation, as well as institution building and socio-economic transformation of the conflict zone a central task. Now let's talk about integrated or whole of government approach. Whole of government in short form is WOG approach. So a few governments have begun to realize that post-conflict security sector reforms as the foremost sector of peace building needs an integrated or whole of government approach. So it is in order to align development agencies with military, intelligence agencies, police, prisons, and civil society. So, this approach has lately become popular and has come to be defined as one where a government actively uses formal and informal networks across different agencies for effective coordination of both the design and implementation of the peace building agreements. So, the focus clearly remains on greater coordination amongst various governmental agencies, both in the theater of post conflict operations as also amongst donor governments and other international agencies. Establishment of interdepartmental organization in major states like United Kingdom and United States in 2004 characterizes this approach. Which approach? Integrated or whole of government approach. So the UK had set up, UK is for United Kingdom. So the UK had set up the Post Conflict and Reconstruction Unit, PSRU, which is now known as Stabilization Unit. Similarly, in the USA, the Office of the Coordinator for Reconstruction and Stabilization was created within the State Department. Similarly, Australia too adopted the approach in 2006 through a white paper on its aid program and inception of Office for Development Effectiveness. However, encouraging these initiatives are the promise of the WOG approach might be severely tested in fragile and unstable states where no formal structures and clear division of labor exist. Now let's talk about political democracy approach. One lesson learned from the experience of peacekeeping operations in the past two decades concern the value of local level governance and related institutions in sustaining peace after ceasefire has been signed. So increasingly, democratic validations of peace agreement between authorities and rebels and later masses has come to be seen as essential for peace building. So this approach is also called war to democracy approach to peace building. So at one level, this approach has positive elements, especially as it signifies a departure from the great powers' persistent tendency in the Cold War decades to embrace dictators for strategic reasons. Now let's talk about institutionalization before liberalization. So, in the West African state of Cote d'Ivoire, maybe my pronunciation is wrong, as part of democratic peace building at the end of the Civil War, elections were held in 2010. Violence erupted, and after the country lapsed into another civil war, which lasted until 2011. So, in 2015, the place held another election without an eruption of violence. So, this is largely attributed to notable change made in this interim period in the electoral institutions as well as the civil society. Now, let's talk about peace versus justice approach. There are some who conceive peace building exclusively in terms of either peace or justice driven approach. So the peace driven approach puts emphasis on saving life and allows accommodation, even appeasement of aggressor to swiftly achieve cessation of hostilities and violence in a conflict. Elizabeth Cossens calls it political peace building, which seeks to create authoritative and eventually legitimate mechanisms which may empower the polity to handle conflict without violence and to apply established procedure for resolving rival claims and grievances. Though this approach is normally effective in ensuring negative peace, they lack the appreciation of victims' perspective since the protagonist of the peace approach tend to treat victim and aggressor as equals. Furthermore, this approach could threaten to fuel the aggressor's appetite for more conflict. So, on the other hand, the justice driven approach to peace building sees building negative peace as job only half done, which may not go far in building a sustainable peace. So, there is a difference between peace approach and justice approach. So, this justice driven approach seeks to go beyond cessation of violence and explore issues of reconciliation, truth, and justice. So, in addition to hard nosed bargain for mutual benefits, it seeks to evolve provisions that appeal to the sense of fairness in the eye of parties, as well as their respective support bases and therefore worth honoring. So, in the context of peace building, justice for them embodies four components. So, truth, fairness, rectitude, and redistribution recruiter. So, these are the four components that embodies justice. So, while truth involves an accurate understanding and recording of the causes of conflict, fairness implies impartiality without any undue pressure on either of the parties to conflict. Similarly, rectitude relates to a sense of integrity and righteousness, whereas and redistribution requital means compassion for victims and punishment for aggressors. Now let's see the key points. So peace building is a shift from short-term peacekeeping to long-term peacekeeping and engagements of peace building operations. Please note it down. This is very important. What is the difference between peacekeeping and peace building? Peace building is an expansive concept that begins after violence has ended and ceasefire agreement is signed. So it includes not only relapse of violent conflict, but also addressing the root causes of conflict and fostering and enabling environment for sustainable peace. So peace building is a regular practice in international relations. Hence, to a large extent, it is still evolving from below through actual peace building operations on the ground. Whole of the government peace building approach is mostly practiced by states with robust institutions. So it emphasizes is on better coordination amongst various governmental agencies in design and implementation of the peace building agreements. Political democracy approach links peace building with democratic governance, with increasing recognition for the value of strong political and economic institutions in sustaining peace. So, in this peace versus justice approach, peace driven approach gives greater attention to saving lives. Please note it down and quickly ending the violence and achieving negative peace. Whereas justice approach is to see peace building to go beyond violence and explore issues of reconciliation, truth, and justice. So it embodies four components: truth, fairness, rectitude, and redistribution, as we have read. Now let's talk about reconstructive versus transformative approaches. Professor Brownie Evans Kent wrote his book Transformative Peace Building in Post Conflict Reconstruction, the Case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, Kent dwells on peace building strategies, which he identifies as reconstructive in approach, as applied in multilateral initiatives under international institutions like the UN. As opposed to this is the transformative approach often adopted by the civil society actors and NGOs as part of their bottom up initiatives. So, according to Kent, both these sets of approaches are two sides of the same coin and complement each other if balanced appropriately. Hence, too much focus on one is not going to be effective, as, for instance, excessive focus by the UN on reconstruction activities has undermined its transformative capacities. So, reconstructive approaches concern themselves with more tangible aspects of peace building, such as addressing the infrastructure needs like roads, communications, healthcare, public institutions, which can benefit, and our outcomes are immediate and equally measurable. Usually, the UN post conflict reconstruction involves monitoring ceasefire, disarming and demobilizing rebels, and ensuring their reintegration through security sectors, and then supervising and conducting the elections. But given this toolkit of peace building, toolkit in apostrophes, it often begins to become too rigid and therefore vulnerable to donor agencies, expansive reporting processes, and preferences. So instead, these need to be locally rooted, intensive, and contextualized. Moreover, these efforts of the UN peace building have often been accused of being driven by major powers' desire to implement democracy and free market economy. On the other hand, transformative approach seeks to address exactly these lacunae, that is, less focus on physical reconstruction and more focus on transforming the social relationship within and amongst the given conflict prone communities. So, as the very first thing, their outcomes remain less measurable and its process is normally time taking. But then transformative approach seeks to address not only manifest but also latent triggers of conflict that impel the conflict protagonist to see violence as only means of redress. So it also believes that parties to conflict are not necessarily homogeneous social identities. Therefore, the focus would be on addressing both the manifest and the felt needs for recognition of respective collective identities, and doing so in such a manner that this recognition does not appear to threaten other parties. Now, let's talk about top, middle, and grassroots approaches. At the top level, peace building normally involves a top down approach, which has following salient features. So, let's talk about this top, middle, and grassroots approaches of peace building. At the top level, it is involved and it is regarding the top down approach, and it has few silent features. First is that it normally involves very eminent and influential yet singular personalities. These are people with a specific public profile working as peace builders or norm entrepreneurs and who operate as intermediaries and mediators. So they have often strong backing from the government of major powers, important international agencies, as also from the parties to the conflict. Second is usually involves very high level leaders from amongst parties to the conflict, and these peace builders generally act on their own to facilitate a dialogue between these high profile protagonists of the given conflict. So, such negotiations are normally arranged by these high profile peace builders at some neutral venue, and they also help facilitate setting up the tone, that is for a successful mutual bargaining amongst major protagonists in the given conflict. So in this top down approach, there is an influential personality who is very much involved in what we can say in a dialogue series, a dialogue between the conflict ridden parties and the area where there is a conflict. So it has high level leaders, and they are backed by either governments of the major countries or by the important international agencies, and maybe they are also from the parties of the conflict. So this is how this top down approach or the top level of approach is works. Now let's talk about the middle level. At the middle level, there remains a whole range of middle ranking leaders, which includes identifiable policy and opinion makers. So, if integrated properly, these mid ranking leaders can provide key to creating infrastructure or atmospherics for achieving an effective peace building by the top level. So, there are several practical and professional approaches that are applied in this category of interactions amongst mid ranking protagonists of conflict. So, these include problem solving workshops, conflict resolution training programs, and setting up of peace commissions and or truth and reconciliation commissions. So, in top level approaches, we have seen that there is involvement of high level personalities who are very popular, and leaders who are backed by the government and the international agencies. At the mid level, we can see that they are mid level ranking leaders, and they focus on providing and creating infrastructure or atmospheric for achieving an effective peace building by the top level. So they wanted to include a few approaches, professional, practical and professional approaches that they should apply so that they can work well. So what are those? That is, first of all, we have read about the problem solving workshops. So workshops has been conducted. There is also conflict resolution training programs that has been conducted. There is setting up of peace commissions and a truth and reconciliation commissions that has been set up. So these approaches have been particularly emphasized in conflict resolution discourses as an addition. These mid-ranking protagonists may also become useful contact point to reach out to the wider mass that form the core of grassroots approaches to peace building. Now let's talk about the grassroots approach. We have learned about top level approach, then the middle ranked approach, and then grassroots approach. So the grassroots approaches remain distinct as they focus not on protagonists but on victims of the given conflict, and these normally involve massive numbers. So do with this is a distinction between these three approaches. Grassroots approach specifically focus not on protagonists but on the victims of the conflict. Grassroots approaches deal with not only protagonists who may be working with the local communities and can facilitate peace builders to access people. So, at this grassroots level, issues in survival mode, such as providing them with food, shelter, and safety, assume the top priority. So, from this perspective, although their miseries flow from an unresolved larger conflict, conflict resolution efforts might appear to be diversionary luxury. Guided by the immediate needs and priorities, the grassroots approaches could often remain focused on ad hoc firefighting rather than involving long term planning, which is the essence of peace building. So this is what grassroots approach is doing. So top level focuses on the personalities, middle on the they organize workshops. There are commissions which is being formed at grassroots level, or different from all other two, is that they focus on the person who are victims of the conflict. So they focus on them, and also they deal only deal with those protagonists who may be working with the local means the victim communities. So this is how grassroots approach works. Now let's talk about the feminist approach. It is very important to use this feminist lens also while talking about peace, war and conflict, because feminist approach, why it is important, because whenever there is a conflict, there is a war going on, it is not only men who are involved. Women are very very in many ways they are also involved in the war, and they are also part and parcel of the war. Whatever is happening in the conflict, they are also one category, one group which is being very much affected by any war and conflict. So this feminist approach is very important to understand, and it is very much needed to see the peace, conflict and war situations from this feminist lens. So the feminist approach consider war as a form of highly militarized patriarchy that is fought among men who make rules, decide when, why and how wars to be fought. So according to this feminist approach, they feel that detrimental impact on women. So whenever there is military war going on, conflict going on, women are very very detrimentally impacted. So often, when the violence of conflict is seen to have ended, the ceasefire agreements are signed, the violence instead emerges inside homes and communities. So, whether there is a conflict going on at external level between two nations, whenever the war is stopped and ceasefire is happened, we thought that the war is over, but violence still runs inside homes and community. For example, domestic violence in post conflict society is found to increase manyfold as men return from the brutal experience of conflict. So after a conflict, men return home, they return home, and there are many researches, many statistics that shows that whenever men come from a conflict and brutal experience of conflict and war, they start taking domestic violence as a tool to uh, get rid of their anger, their frustration, and this domestic violence increase manifold in a post conflict society, which is very very important to note. So feminists thereby looks at peace building as gendered. So for feminists, this peace building is gendered, meaning that the perception of peace and approaches to peace differ based on different experiences positive peace. So, this feminist approach is also seeing peace building from a different and separate lens. So, with this, I end my lecture here today. Thank you.